Is there anywhere you can go in the world where they don't know who you are?
It happened when we were doing...
This is really no.
I think that's a no. I think that's a no.
It happened. I remember once one person didn't know who I was. When did it nearly happen?
No, I can't. No.
Where was it? Where was it?
I'm literally on some island in the middle of the Caribbean, just off Panama, and it's a while ago. And my dresser on the movie had gone out to this island the week before, and he'd got there and he told everybody that he was James Bond. And he'd got treated so well that it was a good day. And when we got to... I went there the following week, and all I remember is we had this little plane, and we landed on this amazing place we went to. And we landed there, and everybody came rushing and went, James Bond, James Bond, James Bond. They looked at me and went, oh.
The casino lights glow. A tuxedoed figure walks into frame, piercing blue eyes fixed on his target. It's 2006, and Daniel Craig has just taken his first step into cinematic immortality with Casino Royale. The cards hit the table, the fists fly, and a new James Bond is born, ruthless, vulnerable, unforgettable. Cut to 2021. A very different image, Craig older now, heavier with time and experience, walking away in No Time to Die. Is a farewell not just for Bond, but for the man who embodied him for 15 years. As the credits rolled, audiences weren't just saying goodbye to 007, they were asking a question that would haunt Daniel Craig: what comes after Bond? For nearly 2 decades, Craig was James Bond. He carried the franchise through reinvention, redefining the role for a modern world. He earned billions at the box office, survived grueling productions, and silenced critics who once called him James Blonde. But the cost was steep. Every role outside Bond was judged through that lens. Every performance was measured against a tuxedo and a martini. This is the story of Daniel Craig's life after Bond, a man wrestling with the shadow of an icon, struggling to prove that behind the legend, there is still an actor, a career, and a human being worth seeing. Because sometimes the hardest mission isn't saving the world. It's saving yourself from a character the world refuses to let you escape. Daniel Rawton Craig was born on March 2, 1968, in Chester, England, far from the red carpets and bright lights of Hollywood. His father was a steelworker turned pub owner, his mother an art teacher. The family separated when Daniel was young, and he grew up with his mother and sister in modest circumstances. Life was never glamorous. It was practical, tough, and often uncertain. From an early age, Craig found refuge in performance. He wasn't the loudest child, but he had a presence, a seriousness that stood out. At age 6, he saw a stage production of Oliver in Liverpool, and something clicked. The stage wasn't just entertainment, it was possibility. By his teens, Daniel was performing in school plays, showing a drive that made him different from his peers. Yet the path was anything but smooth. Craig was rejected from drama schools repeatedly. Teachers doubted him. Classmates mocked the ambition of a working-class kid who dreamed of Shakespeare. But rejection only hardened him. He worked odd jobs, poured pints, and studied his craft relentlessly until finally he earned a place at the prestigious Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, RADA, in London. The years at RADA honed his discipline. He learned the rigors of stage work, the discipline of voice and movement, the patience to live inside a character. While many aspiring actors chase stardom, Craig's foundation was theater. Shakespeare, Chekhov, Brecht. He was not trained to be a celebrity. He was trained to be a craftsman. Through the 1990s, Daniel Craig built his resume the hard way. Small roles in British television dramas, indie films, and stage productions. He played men on society's edges, working-class strivers, soldiers, flawed heroes. Nothing came easy, and nothing came quickly. But bit by bit, his reputation grew. In 1996, he earned notice for Our Friends in the North, a BBC series chronicling decades of social and political change in England. His portrayal of a troubled, idealistic young man marked him as an actor of uncommon depth. Hollywood noticed, but Craig didn't rush. He appeared in films like Elizabeth, 1998, Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, 2001, and Road to Perdition, 2002, often playing villains or enigmatic supporting roles. He was carving a niche as a serious actor, not a matinee idol. His face was rugged, his energy raw, his intensity undeniable. And then came Layer Cake, 2004, a stylish British crime thriller directed by Matthew Vaughn. As the unnamed protagonist, Craig played a suave but weary drug dealer trying to exit the underworld. The performance was magnetic, cool, calculating, but human. The film was a sleeper hit, and suddenly whispers began. Could this man be the next James Bond? Daniel Craig's rise was not overnight. It was built on years of struggle, discipline, and rejection. He was not born into glamour. He earned it, step by painful step. And when the world came calling with a role that would define him, he was ready, but unprepared for the weight it would bring. In October 2005, after months of speculation, Daniel Craig was announced as the new James Bond. The reaction was explosive, and not in a good way. Fans were outraged. Tabloids mocked him as James Blonde. Websites launched petitions demanding his removal before a single frame was shot. To many, Craig didn't fit the mold. He was too rugged, too raw, too working class. Bond, they argued, was supposed to be suave and aristocratic, not a blunt instrument. Craig stayed silent. He let the work speak. And in 2006, Casino Royale premiered. From the opening black and white sequence to the brutal bathroom fight, this was not the Bond audiences thought they knew. Craig 007 was cold, bruised, and vulnerable. He bled. He hurt. He loved. And in one unforgettable poker scene, staring down Le Chiffre with icy blue eyes, Daniel Craig silenced the doubters. Casino Royale was a critical and commercial triumph, hailed as the best Bond film in decades. Overnight, the man once dismissed became the face of the franchise's rebirth. For the next 15 years, Craig was James Bond. Through Quantum of Solace, 2008, Skyfall, 2012, Spectre, 2015, and finally No Time to Die, 2021, he carried the weight of an icon. Skyfall became the highest-grossing Bond film of all time, grossing over $1.1 billion worldwide. His Bond was no longer just a spy. He was a man haunted by loss, shaped by loyalty, torn between duty and desire. Critics praised the emotional depth Craig brought to a character once known only for gadgets and girls. But the cost was immense. Craig's body absorbed the punishment of Bond. Torn shoulders, broken bones, surgeries. He once quipped that he'd rather slash his wrists than play Bond again after Spectre, a comment that revealed just how brutal the role had become. And yet, despite the pain, Craig delivered again and again. His Bond was a paradox, a killer and a lover, a weapon and a man. He wasn't just playing a character, he was redefining a myth for a new century. By the time No Time to Die closed his run in 2021, Daniel Craig had done the impossible. He had taken a role many thought he could never play and turned it into a legacy. He became, for an entire generation, the James Bond. But this triumph created a new prison. Because when you become Bond, who are you when the tuxedo comes off? At first, Daniel Craig wore the tuxedo like armor. It made him untouchable, a global icon. But as the years passed, the cracks beneath that polished exterior began to show. Bond wasn't just a role, it was a physical ordeal. Craig threw himself into the action, insisting on doing many of his own stunts. The price was brutal. Torn muscles, broken bones, endless surgeries. On the set of Quantum of Solace, he injured his shoulder so badly it required 6 screws to repair. During Spectre, he tore his knee and had to undergo surgery mid-production. Each film left him battered, forcing him to train harder, recover faster, and return to a role that demanded more than most human bodies could endure. The pressure wasn't only physical. Craig had inherited a role larger than life, one that carried over half a century of cinematic weight. Every move he made, every creative choice, was scrutinized. Fans dissected his performance. Critics compared him endlessly to Sean Connery, Roger Moore, Pierce Brosnan. It didn't matter that Casino Royale and Skyfall had redefined Bond. Craig was still living inside a shadow. The toll became clear after Spectre in 2015. Exhausted and frustrated, he gave an interview where he said he'd rather slash his wrists than play Bond again. Though later he softened the comment, the honesty was undeniable. James Bond, the role that had made him immortal, was also suffocating him. And then came the other problem. The world didn't want Daniel Craig, it wanted Bond. His attempts to break free with other films, Cowboys and Aliens, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, even Steven Spielberg's Munich, were inevitably viewed through the 007 lens. No matter how strong the performance, audiences saw James Bond in disguise. The cracks weren't scandals. They weren't failures. They were the slow erosion of a man trying to hold on to his identity while carrying the weight of a legend. Craig had become James Bond in every sense. But what if James Bond had swallowed Daniel Craig whole? Daniel Craig's struggle wasn't a spectacular scandal or a public meltdown. It was quieter, but no less consuming. His downfall was the battle to prove he was more than the tuxedo, more than the shaken martini, more than James Bond. After the runaway success of Casino Royale and Skyfall, Craig sought to carve out a career beyond the 007 franchise. But Hollywood wasn't interested in Daniel Craig the actor. It wanted Daniel Craig the Bond. Every new script he considered came with unspoken comparisons. In The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, 2011, he played investigative journalist Michael Blomkvist. The performance was nuanced, intelligent, restrained. But critics couldn't resist. Was he too suave, too Bond-like? When Cowboys and Aliens 2011 paired him with Harrison Ford, the film flopped spectacularly, and headlines mocked the Bond in the Wild West. It became a cycle he couldn't escape. Casting directors saw him as an action star, but audiences measured every action role against Bond. If he played serious drama, the box office sagged. If he played action, the reviews reminded everyone that nobody did it better than 007. Craig had won the biggest role of his life, and in doing so, had lost the freedom to be anyone else. The frustration grew inside him. In interviews, he became blunt about the strain. After Spectre, he admitted the physical punishment was unbearable, saying he couldn't imagine returning to the role. The comment made headlines around the world, feeding speculation that he was done with Bond. Yet a few years later, he came back for No Time to Die, a testament not to love, but to obligation, to finishing what he had started, no matter the toll. The struggle wasn't just professional, it was existential. Craig once described Bond as a ball and chain. He knew the franchise had given him global recognition, wealth, and legacy, but it had also shackled him to an identity that wasn't entirely his. He could win awards, headline new films, reinvent himself on stage, and still, the first line of every article would read, "Best known for playing James Bond." In Hollywood, typecasting is common, but with Bond it is absolute. The role doesn't just define a career, it consumes it. Sean Connery fought it. Pierce Brosnan endured it. Now Craig lived inside it. And the more he tried to escape, the more the shadow followed him. This was his downfall, not ruin in the tabloids, not disgrace and scandal, but the quiet suffocation of being trapped inside a role too iconic to leave behind. Daniel Craig had given the world his Bond. But would the world ever allow him to be Daniel Craig again? For Daniel Craig, rock bottom didn't arrive with scandal, but with exhaustion, an exhaustion that seeped into his bones, his spirit, and his career. By the time Spectre wrapped in 2015, he was battered physically and emotionally. Torn ligaments, broken bones, surgeries, his body had paid the price for every punch, every chase, every stunt that kept Bond alive. His mind, too, carried the weight. Interviews after filming revealed a man utterly drained. When asked if he would ever play Bond again, his infamous reply, "I'd rather slash my wrists," wasn't hyperbole. It was the honesty of a man at his breaking point. Outside of Bond, the picture wasn't much brighter. Projects meant to prove his range were faltering. Cowboys and Aliens had bombed. Dream House, 2011, a psychological thriller co-starring his future wife Rachel Weisz, was critically panned. Even acclaimed performances like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo couldn't escape the 007 comparisons. Each attempt to reinvent himself seemed swallowed by the tuxedo's shadow. Professionally, he was at the peak of global fame. Personally, he was weary of the machine that kept him there. Every red carpet, every interview, every headline dragged him back to Bond. The very role that had saved his career now felt like a cage. Rock bottom for Craig wasn't a dramatic collapse, but a suffocating stillness, the realization that despite his talent, discipline, and years of work, he was still seen as one man only, James Bond. The danger wasn't losing everything. The danger was never being allowed to be anything else. Daniel Craig's story forces us to confront the paradox of legacy. On one hand, he is celebrated as the man who reinvented James Bond for the 21st century, grittier, more human, stripped of camp and excess. He turned 007 from a cartoon into a flesh-and-blood character, capable of love, grief, and vulnerability. For millions of fans, Craig is Bond, perhaps even more than Sean Connery or Pierce Brosnan ever were. But legacy can be a double-edged sword. The very success that cemented his place in film history also built a prison around him. No matter how powerful his performance in other roles, whether as the eccentric detective Benoit Blanc in Knives Out or in the intimate dramas he once craved, he is still introduced first as James Bond. It is a reminder that once an actor becomes an icon, the world rarely allows them to become anything else. This isn't just Craig's struggle, it's a cultural one. We as audiences demand permanence. We want our heroes frozen in time, unchanged, eternal. Connery never fully escaped Bond. Mark Hamill never shed Luke Skywalker. And Daniel Craig, despite his undeniable craft, remains tethered to 007. The question isn't whether Craig has the talent to move on. The question is whether we will let him. His journey also highlights the way fame consumes identity. For all his wealth, all his accolades, Craig found himself asking the same question every working actor asks. Will I be remembered for who I am, or only for what the world wants me to be? That tension between art and icon, between self and shadow, will define Daniel Craig's legacy as much as any performance ever could. The curtain falls on No Time to Die. For audiences, it was the end of an era. For Daniel Craig, it was the end of a lifetime. As the credits rolled and the Bond theme swelled, the image of Craig walking away wasn't just the death of 007. It was the release of an actor from a role that had both defined and consumed him. Now he steps onto new stages. As Benoit Blanc in Knives Out, he trades the tuxedo for a southern drawl, delighting fans with a performance that is playful, strange, and entirely his own. On the stage in London and New York, he returns to his first love, serious theater, reminding the world, and perhaps himself, that he is more than Bond. But the question lingers. No matter how many roles he takes, no matter how many years pass, will Daniel Craig ever truly escape the shadow of 007? Or has he, like so many before him, become immortal only by sacrificing the freedom to be anything else? Because in Hollywood, legends come with chains. And for Daniel Craig, the greatest mission may never have been saving the world. It may have been saving himself from James Bond.